Hello and welcome to the third in a series of Focusrite videos where we will explore Pro Tools First, which now comes bundled with every Scarlett second generation interface. I've installed the Focusrite Creative pack upon registering the unit on the Focusrite website. This comprises of the Pro Tools First installer and 12 new powerful plugins. In this video, I'm going to show you how powerful the Focusrite Creative pack is, combining Red, Softube and the onboard Pro Tools plugins. So this is a track that I've made. So now I'm going to talk to you about how I've utilized the Red plugins, the Softube plugins and Pro Tools internal plugins, all of which you get upon registering the Scarlett second generation interface. Here we've got a stereo mix of drums that I've dragged in from the Focusrite drum pack. Again, you get this upon registering the Focusrite Scarlett second generation interface. So let's have a listen to this. So what I've done is I've added an EQ, and it's the Pro Tools EQ3 7-band equalizer. And I've added a bit of thump around 160 Hertz here, just a couple of dB, well 1.7 dB here. And I wanted to get that snare snapping a little bit more, so I added some 2.1K, another couple of decibels of that, and then some air at the top end there. And it sounds like this. Now I've also sent this to an auxiliary. So here I've created the drum smash auxiliary, and I've put quite a heavy compressor on that channel, and I've got a ratio of nearly 80 here, threshold of -22. I've ramped the gain a little bit, and that really sort of crushes those drums and really sort of flattens them. And when I bleed the dry signal in to this auxiliary, it just adds an extra bit of power and punch. I've taken some of the top frequencies out of that just to take some of the fizz out of the cymbals, because we don't need to hear it twice, and especially when it's being compressed that hard it can be quite unpleasant. And that's again with the EQ3 7-band. And now this Softube plugin, the saturation knob, is really handy. I've put it last in the chain here, and you can simply increase or decrease saturation. So if we solo both of these, I'll turn this down, you can hear the difference. So it just adds a subtle bit of depth and punch to those drums. Now I also recorded some rhythm guitars in, panned hard left and hard right, and I literally loaded the instrument, the 11 Lite amp modeler from Pro Tools First. I didn't even touch it. This is the first preset that it came with. I started playing guitar. I plugged it into the front of the 2i2, and there was literally no latency whatsoever. So I could play my guitar parts in really quickly, layer them up, and there were no sort of delays or problems with relinking things or configuring settings in my monitor software. It's just none of that. So these are the guitar rhythm parts. On top of these, I added the EQ3 7-band EQ, and I just scooped out some of the low mud frequencies and some of the high fizz that you get from amp modelers. Because when you layer up guitar tracks, that top end fizz layers up as well, and it can sound quite brittle, and it can really brutalize your ears after a while of listening to it. So let's have a listen to these. I applied the same principle to this guitar line that I added, but I also added D-Verb, which is one of Pro Tools First's great sounding reverbs. I adjusted the dry wet mix here until I was happy with the results. And there's a harmony part to that as well here. Moving on, I recorded in some acoustic guitars. I panned them quite sloppily here, as you can see. There we go. Not quite hard left, not quite hard right, but just somewhere in between till I was happy with the sound. Now I've loaded the Focusrite Red EQ, and this knob's really handy. You can just cut out any low rumble that you might want to, so I just removed some of that. I removed some of the low shelf here, around about 120 Hertz. And I boosted some of the low mids, around about 600. And I added some brightness to them. I also added a compressor, which is the grey compressor, which sounds great, just to level off some of the transients. And I added the Softube TS-AR1R reverb. Now I've made that reverb size quite big. I've selected a bright colour and I've added some pre-delay. I simply copied that onto the other channel by holding Alt like this and dragging it on. But I don't want to have a second one on there, so I'm going to remove that. And this is what they sounded like. They sound quite unpleasant on their own and a bit too brittle, but in the context of the mix, I think they sound quite nice and just add a sheen to those guitar textures. So let's have a listen. Now moving on, I want to show you the Expand 2 plugin. I went through the presets because I simply didn't have a bass guitar. So I played in one with the Novation Launch Key 49 and I selected, where is it, basses. Firstly, I selected the full finger bass, but I just needed some of that top end pick clickiness to it. So I selected full pick bass, and let's have a listen on its own. So it's quite unpleasant on its own because it is really clicky and toppy, but actually, again, in the mix, it sounds quite good. I've compressed that. I've simply selected a preset, the bass guitar preset, which sounds great, with a Dynamic 3 compressor limiter, which comes in Pro Tools first. I've added the 7-band EQ here, just to take a little bit of the bottom end out, around about 50 Hertz. Otherwise, it gets a bit confusing with that kick drum. Taken around about 212 here. Just remove some of that kind of warbly tone. And I've increased some of that pickiness and that top end. Also, I've got this swoosh track here, which is what I recorded with Ableton Live Lite, one of the synth engines there, and I recorded in some white noise. And it sounds a little bit like this. Just adds a bit of energy to the song. Finally, I created another auxiliary, bus 5 and 6, and I added the studio reverb from Pro Tools. And I've sent the guitars to this. So if we solo those, you'll be able to hear them. Now, one thing I forgot to do was take some of that low end out of this reverb, just to make sure, again, we're not contributing any unnecessary low tone. So in EQ, again, I'm going to load the Red EQ here, and I'm just going to bring it up to around about 330. And that'll just take out any unwanted low rumble. Finally, on the master bus here, I've got a compressor limiter, and I've made a mix press preset, a ratio of 21.6 to 1, threshold -9, and the gain at 5.5. Finally, I've added just a tiny bit of top end, so 1.3 decibels of 7.4K, and that just adds an extra brightness. So let's have a listen to everything in place. So there's just a quick look of how I've treated the individual components of this track with the Red Suite, the Soft Tube Time and Tone bundle pack, and the internal Pro Tools First plugins.